Hello and welcome to another episode of Death by Bunjie. On this episode of Death by Bunjie, I'm going to show you the 8th season where Bunjie and I head to Maryland for the early Crossbow season. Just like we have done in the past, Bunjie and I make the trip down to Maryland, about 5 hours away from our home in northeastern Pennsylvania. We head down there to hunt some deer, shine up some broadheads in the early crossbow season in Maryland. We hunt with a guide down there, so I'm hunting on their properties that they have leases on, places where they have set up for hunting. Some of those properties are suburban style hunting properties with a little agriculture mixed in, and other properties that we hunt are pretty much agriculture and timberland properties. On our first day there, we set up in a really nice tree stand. We cross a little dry creek bed and get up in this tree stand. We get all set up. As I'm climbing into that tree stand, I realize we have a little buddy with us, a little friend who's going to join us on this hunt. It was a little tree frog. "Welcome to Maryland," he says. He's sitting on my boot, and later on he's sitting on the crossbow. Not the best place for a little frog to be sitting. This little tree frog has to find a new home, and we eventually let him sort of escape and get down the tree a little bit. That way Bunjie and I can focus on the hunting. As the sun comes up around us, I can see that we're in a really nice setup. There is a dry creek bed behind me that has a ton of deer prints in it, tons of deer activity. The woods around me are just beautiful. It's gorgeous. It's wide open. I'm about 30 yards away from the edge of the clear cut that I have hunted before and seen tons of deer come in and out of this clear cut over time before in the past. The clear cut is basically where they have timbered off in the past. It's growing back its new load of timber. All the new growth is coming back, and it's just really, really thick deer habitat back in there. Where I'm set up along that creek bed, I'm at the end of an open field, houses behind me, and I have a really nice setup where I can see through this taller timber whether there are any deer coming our way. And 20 yards out from me, between me and that clear cut, what do we see there? Luscious corn, a beautiful pile of corn. Down in Maryland, you can hunt overbait. I am personally 100% opposed to hunting overbait. I don't like it one bit. Unless it's legal, in which case I fully support it and I enjoy doing it. So that's what we're going to do when we're in Maryland. When in Rome, you do as Romans do. And that's what we're going to do in Maryland, hunt over the corn piles that the guide has set out ahead of time. Now, it starts as a beautiful morning, but becomes sort of the calm before the storm, if you know what I mean. What's going on in the news at this time? Hurricane Dorian. Now, plenty of people suffered through Hurricane Dorian, a lot worse than I'm going to. But on the east coast of the United States, you're going to get the fallout of that weather coming up the coast. And sure enough, by the middle of that day, I was sitting in some pretty high winds. Sitting up in a tree in 18-mile-an-hour winds, that's not my favorite thing to do. But it was something that I felt safe, sitting there waiting for deer to come out. Of course, sitting in a tree stand in the wind, also what does that do? It blows your scent all over the place. The likelihood of spotting a deer that morning, not really high, despite the fact that this is a great location. I've hunted through the fallout of these hurricanes before, both in Maryland when I went down there with my nephew years ago, and also I've done that here in northeastern Pennsylvania when a buddy of mine came to visit. And it's not fun. You get too much wind, makes you worry about your shots. Too much rain makes it uncomfortable to be out there, makes you worry about your gear. Not my favorite thing. Before too long, we do have a little bit of activity. A couple of deer come into my right. It's 2 fawns that make their way into that dry creek bed. I'm thinking, great, maybe their mother will come in, maybe we'll get a look at another deer, what have you. And as I'm sitting there, I realize they're not just passing through, they're here to stay. And they bed down below the tree stand, less than 10 yards from the bottom of my tree stand. They're bedded down, just sitting there waiting out the wind. It's still a pleasure to sit there and share a little bit of my hunting experience, my early crossbow season with a couple of fawns. Pretty much I will shoot anything in Maryland that doesn't have spots on it, so these deer are 100% safe. And we do enjoy a little bit of peace and calm there as they're sitting through the wind and sort of shielded from the wind in that dry creek bed. It wasn't long, however, before we had some other visitors, and a whole crew of turkeys came through there. The sound of those turkeys crunching on those leaves spooked those two fawns into the field from where they came, and the turkeys make their way through. Interestingly enough, the turkeys did not go to the corn pile. I thought that was interesting. They actually walked right by it, must have known it was there, but they just kept on going and kept on their way. Well, it was about time to call it quits for that morning. Got out of the tree stand, gathered up all my gear, and headed back to the car. On the way back to the car, I did run into those same two fawns again. Not done with that location, however. I was going to hunt that stand several times throughout this trip to Maryland. It is a good location, has all the ear markings of a very good location, and I did return to that stand later on when the weather was a little bit more cooperative. We climbed up in the stand, got all set up, and about halfway through our morning sit, one of the neighbors decided to mow the lawn. So I was sitting in the tree stand listening to them go back and forth behind me, probably less than 30 yards from my tree stand. And I know that the deer in these suburban neighborhoods, they're less scared about the scent. They're less worried about a little bit of activity nearby. In fact, when I finally climb down, end our hunt, and head out for the morning to go back and regroup at the hotel, I'm leaving and there's a whole bunch of nice deer and a couple of turkeys in the field near my car. Now these deer are feeding in that field after the lawn mowing is done, after the scene is safe at the corn pile, but they're still feeding out in that field, just a grassy field. There's really no crops planted there, anything like that, just eating wild stuff that's growing there. It just goes to show you that hunting over bait is not a guarantee. It does nicely position the deer in front of you when you do get a shot, but it's not like every deer in the area is just simply going to come into that corn all the time. But we're still not done with that tree stand. I really do like that little creek stand there. So we do head back. Bunjie and I finally get a chance to go back to that stand at a later date and set up for an evening hunt. Now, I've had great success in Maryland in my evening hunts. In fact, looking back, I don't think I've ever killed a deer in a morning hunt in Maryland. It just hasn't worked out for me that way. I set up for this evening hunt, very excited about sitting in that same location. And in the late afternoon, we finally did see some deer activity. I'm sitting in a stand, and off to my right over that creek bed, I can hear some footsteps. I look down without moving too much, and sure enough, I see a nice doe making her way down off the bank, coming up over there. She's off to my right. She looks down at that corn pile, but really doesn't have much interest in it. And she heads off into that clear cut. Now, I think at this point, well, at least we're seeing some deer. That one's probably gone for good. She's probably not coming back, or she would have come into that corn pile already. But it wasn't long before out in front of me, I can hear some footsteps. I can hear some movement out there. She makes her way in. She's a little bit cautious. She's alone. There's no fawns in sight, no other deer activity around me. I'm looking off to my left, I'm looking off to my right, not seeing anything. And I'm pretty sure that I'm going to take this shot if I get that opportunity. She comes in sort of straight at me, however, in a real sharp angle where I can't get a shot. But it's not long before I get her to turn broadside just a little bit, giving me that quartering to shot. Bunjie and I, we're going to take that shot. Now that shot is unacceptably high. It's not a result of her jumping the string, at least not that much. It's not even close to where I was aiming. It's higher than where I was aiming. I'm aiming lower in the deer's body in order to accommodate her, to compensate for the fact that she might jump the string. So I'm actually aiming down toward the heart, and instead I spine this deer. Now she's struggling there, and I hate this situation. It happens more than I would like to admit. You've seen it right here on Death by Bunjie. You've seen other situations where I've had problems with these shots, and for for that reason, I have consciously started to pull my shots a little bit lower to accommodate that. Now that's all right. I've got lots of arrows, lots of broadheads. I calmly cock the crossbow, set up for a follow-up shot here to take care of this deer, to put her out of her misery. I cock the crossbow, I load an arrow, I set up, take my time, breathe deeply, make sure I'm taking a proper shot, and I'm waiting for the deer to position herself, and sure enough, she positions herself on her side where I can get a nice clear shot of her vitals, and I'm trying to shoot directly right in the middle and hit her in the heart. I take that shot, and unfortunately that shot goes high as well. It's just a couple of inches high, but it's higher than what I anticipated. Something's wrong with Bunjie. Something is not right with the crossbow when I get two shots that are shooting high like that off a shooting rail from a tree stand at exactly 20 yards where I've used a rangefinder in advance, where when I got to Maryland, sighted in my crossbow to make sure that it was in fact shooting dead on. I shouldn't be having problems like this, at least not twice in a row, that's for sure. But fortunately, the second shot, the follow-up shot, was a lethal shot. It did kill this deer, so she's out of her misery, put her out of her suffering, and I do have one tag filled in our early crossbow season hunt in Maryland. I'll take that, and she broke her off. Well, that arrow is no more. Luminok went off. Unfortunately, I broke that arrow, the precious arrow that I had used at the meet and greet, and I had talked about it at the meet and greet hunt, or hog hunt that we had here recently. You can go and watch that other video. And I've used that arrow over and over. It's probably been through over a dozen animals throughout its lifetime. And unfortunately, it broke during the process of this hunt. So it won't be part of future episodes of Death by Bunjie, unfortunately. Nice big old doe. Now, as happy as I am to fill a tag in the early crossbow season in Maryland, have a deer off to the processor, ready to ride home with us back to Pennsylvania later on when we leave. As happy as I am about that, I'm a little nervous now because the crossbow's acting up. It's not holding the accuracy that I expected. Now, those of you following Death by Bunjie know that this summer in August, I did a live stream out in the backyard and dry fired the crossbow during that live stream. Check it out if you haven't seen that already. As awful and embarrassing as that is, I recovered quite nicely, and after that time we went to the meet and greet. It was shooting just perfectly leading up to that when I was sighting in for the meet and greet. Went to the meet and greet there at the Tioga Boar Preserve, shot a very nice boar. It was a great time had by all, and the crossbow performed perfectly. I mean, I had to take two shots there too, but I think there's other reasons for that. It wasn't as though the accuracy was at issue. But now I got a problem with accuracy. Before we hunt further, we've got to make sure that Bunjie is in 100% shape to go out there and take accurate shots. To see how that goes, you need to subscribe to Death by Bunjie and check back later. Next week, we'll talk about part 2 of this hunt in Maryland. Until then, all hail Bunjie! Here will be a file, recording 6, 7, okay. Put that back in the pocket. Should be recording just fine. Levels look good. We'll give it a little clapper. That will give us a good starting spot. Hello and welcome to another episode of Death by Bunjie. Man, you're just sweating like a pig. This is gonna be awful. I've been through hurricanes before, and the overflow from these hurricanes, it's not overflow, it is the fallout. That's a very good way of putting it. Yeah, we're looking good. We're looking good. Okay. I think that went good.